Homage to the fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to the wisdom warrior Manjushri, homage to all the lineage masters. The supreme, profound, and sublime Dharma is difficult to meet even in a billion years, but now I have been fortunate enough to have seen it, heard it, received it, and kept it. I vow to attain the true meaning of the Tathagata. In order to benefit all sentient beings, let's generate the supreme Bodhichitta. Today, let's continue with the teaching of transform suffering and happiness into enlightenment. I'm not quite sure yet what to teach after this particular text. I don't think I will give the teaching on the previous texts except analyze for Confucius. I'm not quite sure about the other classes yet. Previously, I thought about giving teachings on Madhyamika but we'll see. The main reason of giving teachings on transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment, it is because I think sentient beings are suffering quite a bit, especially nowadays. People really are terrified of problems and obstacles and sufferings, and it is because how the world has already changed, and there are so many factors that could change, and so many factors of insecurity. So in such a way, everyone's suffering. Therefore, at this particular time, to have a pith instruction, to have some method to work with all of these suffering is in fact quite appropriate. Therefore, to give the teaching of this text is really a wonderful timing. Of course, it would be really great of not having any suffering. You don't really necessarily have to go and search for suffering, but you don't have to worry of running out of different problems at all, because everyone will encounter problems and sufferings. I remember that I watched a program around the New Year's, and the journalists were interviewing people on the streets, asking them, "Are you happy?" And people would say, "I am happy, I'm very happy." I think maybe they pretended that because if you send out another group of journalists and ask people, "Are you suffering? Do you have problems?" I think lots of people would say yes to that as well. In terms of problems and sufferings, in fact, there are times where there are lots of different sufferings that's added together. There are suffering of suffering, that's suffering of sufferings. You have 2 or 3 problems going on together, even dozens of them adding onto each other at the same time, especially after the pandemic. I think there are lots of people who would feel lots of pressure in terms of their finances, and I think maybe the monastics don't have maybe they don't have lots of feelings towards this, but for lay practitioners, they would have loans and mortgage on their cars and house, and it would be really difficult for them to pay them back. So all of our original patterns, life patterns, and the way we live the life, I think, is not going to get that back in the next 3 to 5 years. In terms of the general global politics, there are changes as well. We can see that through watching different domestic and international news. And it seems that there's so much stress between countries. In terms of personal level, people's relationship and their family life and their life, there's so many different kinds of problems also add on to each other. There are people who would get sick and would worry, did I get the virus? And they don't really want to go to the hospital. Of course, whenever there are such problems, you should learn to accept it. That's the very entrance level of practice. Even non-practitioners could do that. But now we're talking about it. We're talking about not only you should accept it, you should feel happy. Like, there's an opportunity for me to practice upon it. It is not very practical to ask you to do this right away, of course, but I think you can start off with thinking that I can accept the suffering to start with instead of I want it to be over. For example, if you get sick, you want the illness to be over, or get criticized and slandered by others, or people chase after you because of the debt. So there's so many different kinds of wishes in your mind, wishing all of these sufferings would be over. But if you're a better practitioner, you would think, instead of let all of the sufferings to be over, you would think, well, there's an opportunity for me to practice. It's wonderful that now I have a problem, now I have some sufferings going on. If you have such a rare realization, of course, that's really wonderful. But if you only listen to it without a practice, it won't work. But if you practice on it, you won't be afraid of suffering anymore. If you continue to practice whatever problems you would encounter in human life, you will be able to face them bravely, and you won't be scared at all. You can accept it with your own ways. That's a very great characteristic and quality you can have, and every one of us really need that. Do people have suffering? Of course. And once you have suffering, if it doesn't harm you or doesn't disturb you, I think this kind of realization or inner stability is quite admirable. Whatever you do in samsara, if you can have this kind of mentality, I think you will be able to succeed. I think this teaching is in fact quite important and very timely. Rather than when we talk about the Prasangika school from Madhyamika, talking about the self-characterizing essence or the true cessation and the 3 and 4 causes and so on, it could be useful, especially when you deeply analyze it, but still a little bit far away from our actual life. And therefore, over here it talks about how everyone have problems and have sufferings. Therefore, it is the practical advice for us to practice. Previously, we've already talked about how you can practice upon renunciation. If you have renunciation, you will be able to renounce the suffering as well. And you can practice upon taking refuge. You will feel not alone anymore. You have a place to rely. The third one is, we're going to talk about the third one today, that is to overcome arrogance. I am going to give you the oral transmission.
Geva la gavana, dungur la lupi deva la gana, Ija geva la mbatu gusu, nyamder jeperup samla, urku tamani gi chula, gi chuk jemperup shagur, nyarjela, pana dagjanda semchang janya dungur, ter tavadang dili chiyang nartsir nam samde dedag jang dungur, tang charna chimarung nyamder jang. Devi Pongwa la Mugne, Shambab Gomsir, Yang Theatre, Di Shiso. Dagwe Janchi Gombana, Dagunderter, Dungurji, Moktonwana, Tongame Pane, Rang Chibrson, Lambe Dana, Delagim John, Jan Chinzon Kona, La Nepre Shagoniam, the Gom. They are don't Pigdi Shender Gave, Stenganda, Chiji, gives your day, Gani, Jipa Karcheja. Ranin kang la combattre sarvaji sovuru zonte tina kachego de hungur gevjur ji chuksu sonwa chigpi kyang machukte terter sonwa te lagbar ngo shine di changwa gawa shik chagla yin tanbo jigba ji ngipir do gupe cherkut shapa te ta kang tse yang dartar de hungurin di dagla shind nipur kavam thori dang tharwi Derkit zangwa mang wa zhipi chuk jachir shi sirndi tadong yang fietperin yerwe ndonar zip yang chuk de nede sigmi nali shamchepi shaka rayi latavjan Jibartava go nyam de tsir jipta yang yang samla yid deva la kumbra shago.
So the next one, the third point, point C, using suffering to overcome arrogance. As I explained before, we should pick a practice that is the closest to us, the most suitable to us, to work on our problems and our sufferings. If you only talk about the methods in theory, talking about I am not only going to accept suffering, I am going to be happy about it. If you only word it, talking about it, I don't think it would actually benefit you in terms of your inner happiness. In fact, whenever there is any suffering happen to you, it's very difficult to endure that. Some people would even lose faith of living because of such suffering. I think it also depends on people's different karma. There are people who have more positive karma. They are able to endure suffering, and suffering won't be that excruciating for them. But for people with negative karma, along with many complex conditions, they would feel lots of torment. So it's very difficult to control how you would react when suffering comes, especially when there is some illness. There are people who would die in peace without much illness torturing them and would die very peacefully. And there are people who would die with excruciating pain and illness at the time of death. They would cry out loud and so on. Even some of them are great masters. That is because the suffering would continuously to torture them. And at that moment, if you want to say that I'm so happy that I am suffering, it would be kind of difficult. Sometimes we have the mental suffering. It could be endurable, and sometimes it could be physical suffering, such as headache and so on. It would be very difficult to endure. And at that time, to say I'm happy would be very difficult. Anyhow, if you know the method and could practice at the time, it would still be very useful. As previously we've studied that, as previously stated, I myself had encountered many difficulties and obstacles, and many things that created lots of pain for myself. But I tried very best to transform them into virtuous deeds. And at the end, it turned out not became adversities or unfavorable conditions, but in some ways they all transformed into things that had more value and more meaningful. So first of all, don't be afraid. Whenever you're ill, for example, all sentient beings do get ill. If you can practice in such a way with renunciation, that's wonderful. Or you can practice upon invoke devotion to from the three jewels, and in such a way it would be very helpful too. Or another way, the third way, is that the illness is just very timely because I tend to be very arrogant. People might say that I'm not arrogant at all, but I don't think that's very necessary, because as it is stated in words of my perfect teacher, it says that jealousy and arrogance are the most difficult to recognize for people. For yourself, you may feel that you're humble and down to earth and all of that, but maybe for others, you're very arrogant. And when you are young, it is difficult to discover that, but when you get older and more mature and with more wisdom, you would understand that you were very arrogant, and lots of the things that you did were out of arrogance or jealousy even. Lots of negative things could result in the things that you regret nowadays. So now it talks about using sufferings to overcome arrogance. As I explained before, as long as we're in samsara, we're never independent or truly free or in control of our lives. Sentient beings are not free. They don't have full control of their own lives. This is extremely important to remember, because if every one of us could contemplate on the suffering of samsara in depth, then I think that would be very helpful for your practice, because people do not understand the suffering in samsara, and they do not understand impermanence. Therefore, they would praise and they would admire whatever worldly success other people have. But once you really get to know those people that you admire, in terms of people who achieved worldly success, you would understand that those people, after attaining all those admirable things, they are still suffering inside. I myself have a deep feeling of that, because I've met many with wealth and with fame and so on. The worldly beings praise different kinds of qualities and different kinds of materials and things that people might desire. But at the end, it turned out, all of those things turn out to be not so wonderful anymore, because its nature is somewhat either the cause of suffering or the creation of suffering. So through those teachings, we would be able to understand we need to use suffering to destroy, we need to use we need to use suffering to overcome our arrogance, as well as belittling others. If we cannot practice virtuous deeds and stop others from doing so, these are the things that could completely destroy our virtuous deeds and roots. Arrogant people tend to belittling others. I remember there's a story of Bhikshu Niti from the sutra. He looked down on his subordinates a lot. Therefore, the fruition of him is spend 500 lifetimes to clean the bathroom. Therefore, in our lifetime, with our own wealth, social status, and all different kinds of things that may be better than others, in all of these kind of standards, we would belittle others, scoff at others, create painful situations for others, and the fruition of such is in fact quite horrifying and would be really difficult to endure. Therefore, this kind of arrogance is talked about in the Sutra of Right Mindfulness, where it says that your family lineage, your wealth, and all of those things that you tend to enjoy in this world, in fact, are all impermanent, and the wise ones should not believe and rely on any of those. Whatever you have in this lifetime that are admirable, such as beautiful appearance, such as the family lineage, such as, for example, there are people who are from family of government officials and and so on, or with wealth, or different toys. I remembered that when I was young, all the kids really enjoy collecting the wrappers of candies, and the kids would collect all those wrappers and would compare one to another. If one got a little piece of fruit candy, they would be quite proud and started to showing off to the others. See, I have this candy, but you don't. In fact, for the worldly beings, it is exactly the same, except that it's no longer candy anymore. It is a car, a house. It is your degree, a bachelor degree or a PhD. People then compare yourself to the others with different standards, and everyone think that they're special. Let it be opinions, let it be their look, and so on. However, as the wise one, you should understand all of these stated things above are defiled. They let it be wealth or family, and all of those, they're just like water bubbles. Maybe at the beginning you could have it, but after a little while, what happens to it? You should know about that. I think this pandemic, in fact, taught quite a bit to all of us, many families, many people, domestically, internationally, definitely manifested this impermanence. I think whenever we encounter suffering and problems, the arrogance would be destroyed, would be overcame. Sometimes I think to myself that it's wonderful that those people created obstacles on my path of liberating sentient beings and giving teaching to others to benefit sentient beings. Maybe at the beginning I don't quite feel very comfortable about it, or don't feel very good about those things that they did to me. But afterwards, when I think about it, I would think that's good. It could help me to overcome my arrogance. I hope that all the people who are jealous of me and create obstacles for me would enjoy happiness, and then I would contemplate again and again in such a way. Anyhow, whenever I encounter anything, I would think about that it is very difficult for people to always have a very smooth road, smooth journey, because people created karma. Or if a person's path is rather quite smooth, they would create even worse karma along the path because they don't understand what renunciation is. They cannot generate such renouncing mind towards samsara. So that is through suffering you can overcome arrogance. When people are healthy, they feel they're the best, and when they get ill, they became more faithful. When people have social status, when they're ministers and governors and all those officials, they are quite arrogant, but after they resign from those posts, they are completely different when you have tea with them. So same applies to wealth and so on. After people lose all of those things, they tend to grasp onto it. They tend to be more accommodating to others. Therefore, it could be helpful. The suffering could be helpful. And then the fourth one is using suffering to purify harmful actions. Remind yourself and realize all the suffering which I'm going through and suffering which is great still are all the boundless sufferings that there is come from nothing but harmful negative actions. I think for the Buddhists it's quite important to believe or have deep faith in karma and causes and conditions and fruition. You should contemplate, today I am unhealthy. It must be because I used to kill other sentient beings in this lifetime or the other. Why I lost all my money? It is probably because I must have had robbed other people's money before or harmed others. So we should understand that, in fact, karma is certain, cause and effect is infallible. The second one is karma multiplies enormously. And whatever you commit, and the third one is you will never face the effect of something you have not done. And fourth one, whatever you have done will never go to waste. We often say that all the karma that's created by sentient beings will not be in vain, even in thousands of eons. And whenever the causes and conditions mature, the fruition will definitely mature. So if you don't want to have those sufferings, you must eradicate its cause. That is all the non-virtuous deeds, such as killing, thefting, and so on. You should use all the antidotes to. You should use the antidotes and confess all the previous wrong deeds you've done, and make the vow of not doing them ever again, and treat them with great with wholeheartedness. And then you say to yourself, so if I don't want to suffer anymore, then I must give up the cause of suffering, which is negativity. With the help of the four powers, make an effort to acknowledge and purify all the negative actions you have accumulated in the past, and then firmly resolve to avoid doing them in the future. As it is stated in the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra, it says that whatever karma that we've accumulated has great powers, and such karma would not chase the ones who did not create them. If you did create such karma, then the fruition will definitely come. If you didn't, then it won't mature. Many practitioners, of course, they truly believe in the cause and effect, and they would think to themselves, I will not create negative karma, otherwise the fruition could be very horrible. And this kind of negative karma that I create may even mature even when I attain the fruition of arhathood, bodhisattvahood, and so on. Such as when Master Xuanzang got ill, someone appeared in front of him saying that now the fruition of your previous karma has matured. So we can see even the great masters like Xuanzang would also experience the suffering of previous negative karma. We should contemplate in such a way. As it is stated in even the Diamond Sutra, where it says that all the suffering that I should have endured when I reborn into the realm of hungry ghost and hell realm, if I experience them in this lifetime, it would be rather much lighter than I should have received, such as headache and so on. With such kind of suffering, if you experience it in this lifetime, you may avoid it in reborn in hell realm, and that is much better. So for some Buddhists, after after they took refuge and become a Buddhist, right away they don't get their body is not as healthy anymore, and so on. You can contemplate in such a way. So the benefit of suffering is that it could help you to take refuge in the three jewels. It could help you to eradicate your arrogance, and it could help you to, and it gives you a chance to confess your previous negative karma. There are people who would there are people when they're healthy, they don't really confess, but once they get ill, they would then right away go release life and do lots of positive deeds, and they would say that I used to eat lots of seafood, but now I don't anymore. So things like such, I think it really shows that it is a great way of creating opportunities for you to confess your previous karma. This year, I think, because of the pandemic, in some ways, I think many people truly felt that because we killed so many sentient beings before, we should really confess. Well, of course, I think without having to make this point very clearly, we would feel that this pandemic has something related to human beings ourselves. So this suffering, of course, it would be really wonderful to confess and from this aspect, I think it is very meaningful. The fifth aspect is using suffering to find joy in positive actions. There are people who probably didn't have faith. They said that, well, I'm suffering quite a bit. Could you ask the Sangha to release life for me? Could you ask Sangha to chant mantra for me? I would ask why. They said, well, just many problems happened. When people encounter problems, they would want to practice virtuous deeds. I think many people have that kind of mindset. For example, many relatives of our Sangha over here who are non-believers, they don't believe all the mantras and all the pendants and so on. But during pandemic, they would ask around and say, do you have so-and-so mantra and the pendant? Can I keep it at my home? Because I think it would be helpful. And I think this pandemic definitely brought lots of people stronger or closer to having a faith. Therefore, suffering brought something beneficial to them. Suffering brought them faith. This is quite wonderful. And then say to yourself, if I really want to find happiness, which is the opposite of suffering, then I have to make an effort to practice its cause, that is positive action. We should then try our best to practice the cause of the direct cause of happiness is virtuous deeds, and the direct cause of suffering is non-virtuous deeds. So in order to attain happiness, then you have to practice virtuous deeds. And in such a way, it slowly will let you depart of the sufferings, and at the same time, the virtuous deeds and happiness will grow naturally. Or when you're suffering, your faith towards virtuous deeds will continuously to grow. So, but whenever we're happy, maybe we practice very diligently, but whenever there is suffering, people could give up their faith and practice, and that would be very a wrong way of looking at it. I really like this teaching from Avatamsaka Sutra, where it says that even if there's a even if there is a hot plate of iron that is circling on top of my head, I am not going to view it as with that kind of suffering, I am not going to give up my bodhicitta. I remember Master Montan, who's a famous Zen master in China. He encouraged himself with that verse when he was imprisoned. Even if you suffer from a hot iron plate that is whirling on top of your head, which is really hot and very difficult to endure, under such circumstances, will not give up your awakened heart, your bodhicitta. We should have such firm faith. Whatever suffering you're facing, you should not give up on the willingness to practice virtuous deeds. This is extremely important. But we ourselves tend to do rather the exact opposite. Whenever there's a tiny bit of problem that happens to us externally, and then you would say, no, I can't do this anymore. And right away you feel scared, and some of them would even get derobed. So, without deep faith, whatever little changes that happens outside would waver your inner faith, will waver your belief. Therefore, it is only through obstacles and turbulence you will know if a person have a genuine deep faith or not. In fact, after encountering difficulties, there are people who would practice more diligently on virtuous deeds. It is said that when people are sitting on the saddle, the body should be light, and when a person is facing critical moment, the mind should be quite stable. It means that you can only see a person's true character through difficulties. It is said a friend in need is a friend indeed. So in such a way, you can really see a person's genuine practice. Some people, after encountering a little bit of difficulties, and then right away they give up their faith. And there are people who would face great torment and not giving up on their faith. Just like the more you tempering the gold, the purer the gold. I think it really applies to our faith and practice. I understand that there are people who cannot go through difficulties. But look at the great masters from the past. Master Montan, in his later years, he was imprisoned for 33 years, and there are people who asked him, have you ever thought about committing suicide? He said, yes, I did. But because my name is Montan, Montan means contemplating in dream. So he told lots of dreams So he said that in his dream he dreamt that he will have opportunities to give the Dharma teachings to people after he got released from prison. Therefore, that really kept him to persist all the way through. With this kind of genuine wish, he then stabled his mind and did not commit suicide. Do we have people here who ever committed suicide? Well, maybe not. How about Kempos and Kamos? Maybe as well. Do we then meditate in the dreams? I'm not sure. But anyhow, in whichever way, even if you don't dream with meditation, I think it's the best not to choose such an extreme way of ending your life. Sometimes those are just dualistic thoughts, and this kind of deluded thoughts are not reliable at all. If Dharma masters and Kempos and Kemos had such thoughts of committing suicide, I think lots of people must have many more of those. Anyhow, I think we should supplicate to the three jewels so that we can control our mind. Anyhow, the general idea is the only way of increasing your virtuous aspiration is to have virtuous aspiration at all times. According to treatise on the response of Tao, it stated that if our mind is constant, accompanied with kind thoughts, then the good spirits will follow you. If otherwise, then the evil spirits will follow you. So instead of thinking about how other people are not treating you well, I think we should be really kind, because in such a way the things will go eventually more smoothly. The sixth one is using suffering to train in compassion. Say to yourself, just like me, others too are tormented by similar suffering, or even much worse. Train yourself by thinking, if only they could be free from all this suffering, how wonderful it would be. This will also help you to understand how to practice loving kindness, where the focus of practice those who have no happiness. So whenever we encounter suffering, we can contemplate that there are so many sentient beings who are enduring even worse suffering than mine right now. Therefore, at that time, you can generate bodhicitta and then contemplate in such a way, I am suffering quite a bit because of my illness, and please may all other sentient beings not suffer what I am going through right now. In fact, the sentient beings are quite in fact, they are under lots of anguish because of suffering. And for example, when I experience the suffering, I can feel other people suffering. When there was a period of time, I had a sore around my ankle, and I had to limp through and walk in such a way, but around that time it was very difficult for me to see other people who also have difficulties to walk. And then it is because I understood that kind of suffering. For example, once after I get off the airplane, I tried to help others with their luggage because that person also had an ankle or walking problem. So we should try to practice in such a way that to contemplate on other people's suffering as well. And in that way, we will generate more compassion. If you don't want suffering, others definitely don't want suffering either. We can think about the suffering that is endured by sentient beings in war, in famine, and in all kinds of disasters. Of course, other suffering and your own suffering, still there's a big gap in between. As it is stated in the Tibetan idiom, it says that the burning of mugworts, which is a herb, on your clothing is different than the burning on the skin. Similarly, when you have suffering, when you have problem, you would feel extremely uneasy. However, when it happens to people who are far away from you, you may not have any feeling at all. That is exactly the reason why our practice is not good. When coronavirus happens to ourselves or our family members, we would feel great anguish. But when it happens to people who are not related to us at all, then you don't feel anything at all. And same applies to your country. And sometimes people would even think that, well, you deserve it. Look at how you used to treat us. So there are people like that as well. But as Mahayana practitioners, as Mahayana bodhisattvas, when they see other people suffer, they suffer the same. Of course, it depends on your own practice. The example of burning mugwort is exactly the same. When you're burning on your skin, it's different than burning on clothing. I think this is quite a great metaphor. When you are the one who's enduring suffering, is different than when other people are enduring the suffering. And it would be also different than when people you love or you care are enduring such suffering. So it's all different. That's another method of practice, is to train compassion. The last one is using suffering to cherish others more than yourself. Train yourself to think the very reason why I am not free from suffering such as this is from the time immemorial I have cared only about myself. And now from this moment onwards, I will only cherish others, as this is the source of all happiness and good. From this moment on, make such kind of determination. I will start to help others and cherish others and benefit others. The only reason that I suffer right now is because that you only love yourself, love your own body, love your own relatives and friends, love whatever is yours. Those are the reasons that created your suffering. Therefore, from now onwards, instead of giving up on other sentient beings and repulse other sentient beings, you should understand that love self and hate others is really the source of suffering. Therefore, with the guidance of the spiritual friend, you should understand that we must see others just as ourselves. And over here, not only we don't harm others, we have to give up ourselves. This is a very high level of realization. We can talk about it theoretically, but can we really do that? Can we really benefit others and give up on ourselves? That's not easy. But as Mahayana practitioners, we have to work towards that. This is our responsibility. Well, now ask yourself, why did you make the aspiration of generate bodhicitta? Nobody really forced you to. We all generated, we all aspired for bodhicitta willingly. So since we've already done that, then we should contemplate that all the sentient beings in the three realms are suffering quite a bit. So we should try even a little bit to help others. And that's exactly what we should practice, cherish others more than ourselves. When we talk about we love others, in fact, the majority of the time it is very pretentious. It is that we only love ourselves. And this kind of self-cherishing love is not only harmful to ourselves, it is harmful to others as well. This kind of love with grasping is very, it could create lots of pain to self and others. But the love that comes from Mahayana Buddhism Bodhisattvas is in fact the genuine love, the big love, the love that is completely true. But for the love that comes from sentient beings are rather very superficial. And that kind of love in some ways can be called hatred, or it's very diluted, in fact. It cannot be beneficial to others. So previously we talked about when we encounter suffering, we have to give rise or learn to train ourselves to have the attitude of cherishing mind and joyful mind. Not only that we should be joyful, we have to have our practice. So the practices are the 7 that are stated above. I really hope all of you would read into all the 7 and maybe pick 1 or 2 that you would focus yourself in practicing. I think it would be very difficult to practice on all of them at once, but I think it takes time for you to familiarize yourself with all of them. You can practice upon renunciation, or take refuge through the 3 jewels, or try to practice on Tonglen, and try to alleviate all the other sentient beings' pain. If you can contemplate in such a way, then our suffering is in fact quite valuable and meaningful. So over here then says that it is extremely difficult to use suffering as the path when it has already struck and is staring us and it is staring at us in the face. At the point when the suffering is staring at you and you want to practice at that moment, it's probably a bit difficult. For example, right after studying this, and at the end of class, someone tells you that, oh, your parents died. Why don't you practice enjoy this suffering and generate the attitude of joy when you hear such obstacle? But I think it would be very difficult. But at that moment, what you can do is to contemplate that because of the death of your parents, of your loved ones, then you can practice up on generating certainty in samsara is suffering. But of course, it would be very difficult to do it right away. Then what should you do? Then first of all, that is why this is crucial to become familiar in advance with the specific practice to be used when misfortune and difficulties befall us. That is why we need to practice in advance, just as how some soldiers would practice in advance every day, so that whenever there is whenever they have to go to the battlefield, then they would be familiar with all the weapons. So in the process of us practicing, either we can practice up on renunciation or impermanence, or the previous ones we've already talked about, such as Tonglen and so on. Whatever suffering, whatever misfortune that happens, whatever enemy that we're facing, whatever bad conditions that's coming, I think at that time, when all of such all down on you, your mind would rather be very soft and at ease and big-hearted. I think I think that is the reason why practitioners have more strength and resilience, and that is how they can succeed through the practice. It is because they've prepared themselves. They've practiced to prepare themselves. Any kind of skills, reading and practice, all need preparation, all need practice. This is quite important. So it is also particularly helpful and will really count if we use practice we know best and of which we have a clear personal experience. This is quite important. Whenever we're young, since we're still young, we still have opportunity, we should really dedicate ourselves to one particular practice. Otherwise, when we encounter impermanence, you won't be able to do anything about it. I think in the year 2020, we have lots of calamities. First, it started the year with a pandemic, and then maybe later on, there's a danger of a famine. I think, especially in Africa, all different kinds of bankruptcy, famine, the man-made calamity or the natural disasters happened this year. I think all of these kinds of disasters that happened this year should bring a clarity on how we tend to be, how humans can be so arrogant and so so lazy during when they in the past. For some practitioners, if they have some savings, they can use such savings when when there's not a good economic there's not a good economy, and it's just like that. Some practitioners have good savings in their practice, and then when suffering dawns, they will be able to withdraw those practice and use it. Since we're still young, we're not that old yet, our eyes can read still, our ears can hear still, and we can still move about, and our memories are still good. So we should seize such an opportunity to practice, unlike the opposite situation. That is, as it is stated, do not try to practice when you're do not wait to practice because you can look at all the tombstones. They are most of them bury the young. Do not practice and do not start studying when you are old. You should really start right now, especially for young people when they still have a good memory and they can hear well, see well. Unlike when people get to 80s and so on, they can't write well, they can't see well on PowerPoint. They have to change and switch different eyeglasses and still can't read. Well, we should seize the opportunity while we still have health, we still have energy, when we still have all the favorable conditions. So we should prepare our practice that we can use later on, because we know that suffering will indeed happen later on. And what can you do after suffering happens? Then you should prepare the medicine that you may need later, the medicine that you know is going to be helpful to you. That's what the wise ones would do. Instead of fearing for suffering, we should prepare to face suffering, and everyone should have their own methods of face suffering, because at the time, I think when misfortune happens to you, you cannot buy any antidote for suffering at that time. Therefore, whomsoever you are, who is still going through the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death, we really have to contemplate how we can face those and what kind of methods we can use to face it. Well, I myself, I can't say that I've completely realized the emptiness. However, in terms of turning suffering and happiness into the path, I do have a suggestion because I do practice in my own practice or in my way of facing different misfortunes and problems. In fact, I view all of them as positive. Whenever I encounter any misfortune and problems, I would think that, well, there's no way to run away from it. I will face it. Of course, facing it doesn't mean that you force it to go other way or you try to try stubbornly to resolve it. In fact, I would use such suffering to change my behavior, my action, and try to find a different way to look at the suffering's value and meaning, to discover its meaning and see it as an opportunity. I would advise you that do not see wherever you live as this is my hometown, this is my residence. Do not see your family and friends as your family and friends forever, that you cannot depart from them at all. Don't think in such a way, because you will depart from them. Just like all your money should not be saved in the same bank. If this bank went bankruptcy, then all of your money would be at loss. Therefore, we cannot put all of our hope onto only one thing, only one practice or one teaching. We have to have preparation. We have to have really the worst. We have to prepare for the worst. For many years, I contemplate on myself as well. My house, my so and so, those are all very impermanent, very temporary. There's nothing that would last forever in samsara. People may say that you're too negative, you're too pessimist. You should think about the happy life. This is really not very positive of you. In fact, yes, you can think about things in this way, but when you encounter suffering, if we're prepared, then we can be more positive to face it rather than running away or being very pessimistic when suffering occurs. So I think it's quite important for us to prepare for it in advance. And if you can prepare it in advance, then whatever happens in your life can be of great companion to you, can be a favorable companion to you, such as the Buddha. In fact, he said that without Devadatta, then the sixth paramita cannot be practiced to perfection for the Buddha, and it is because of Devadatta the Buddha then perfected the sixth paramita, 10 paramita. So when we listen to this story, it's very difficult to imagine, wow, Devadatta is such a horrible person. And I would disagree. I think, in fact, the Buddha see the whole situation in a completely different way. So practice or transform suffering into path. I think you should practice whatever would be the best for you, would be the most familiar to you. I myself, I think I really enjoy practice on impermanence. I would think about, well, I used to be really healthy, but look at my body now. I used to be a good person, look at me now. And I think because suffering tends to be very coarse, it's very difficult to endure kind of mentality. It's brutal. But right away, if you can contemplate up on impermanence, then it's nothing. Because it is impermanent. For example, if you understand that, for example, if someone got late-stage cancer, you can ask the doctor how long you still have, and doctor said no, there's no way to cure it. Then you can only live for 3 months after. Well, 3 months is not bad. It's almost 100 days, and you can think that I can practice. I can practice in retreat. I think you will be able to gain lots of happiness in that time. I'm not sure if people can understand this kind of realization in practice. So anyhow, we should not trust the samsara. We shouldn't trust the samsara very much, just as you shouldn't trust a bad person. If you trust a bad person, you may not end up very well. If we don't recognize the nature of samsara, think that samsara is all really wonderful and happy, you may get a very different answer than optimistic. If you recognize the nature of samsara, even something happened, you will be prepared. I think nowadays there are so many teachings on being positive, being happy in this life, and the young people, after they graduated from university, they step into society and think that the world is just like a heaven. Especially nowadays, the media guide people to think that there's so much happiness in the world, and we have the technology such as computer, internet, and so on. And young people to think that I will enjoy this world. But after they step into the society, they realize that there is a huge gap between dream and reality. At that time, what do you do? How can you view this world? So, from different aspects, we should think about what we can do. This is practice. I think this would be very helpful. There is no difficult theory that is taught in this teaching of transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment. But if you contemplate upon it very deeply, I think we'll be very we will be very resilient. Even if you get sick, you won't be crying and say, "I'm sick. I am sick. My family member, my friends, and so on." You would suffer from different things. If we have suffering, then we should practice. Without practice, it would be difficult for anyone to face our world. I think this pith instruction is in fact very useful and very practical. I really hope that you can contemplate upon it. I understand that there's not many writing over here, but the content is very sublime, it's very profound and practical. So if you can familiarize yourself with this, then I think within this lifetime, this is the teaching that you use more often than Mahā'ati or the Mahaprajnaparamita. If you can't, if you can't apply it, then you don't really gain anything other than the merit that comes from listening to the Dharma. Just as if your mind is not focused, then doesn't matter how many classes you listen to, it won't be very meaningful. So today we talked about the relative truth, and next time we'll talk about absolute. We'll stop here today.
Sonam dai tamche zubanya tomnan nibe jana pamshe jang tirgana je ralong chuba chibum solen joa